Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We have libraries all across the North America, the US, and Canada joining us. And we're so excited to share this great panel with you all. I'm going to turn it over to John Fine to get started.
Thanks so much, Allie. Allie will, in fact, be joining us in a more substantive role in a few moments. My name's John Fine. For many years, I was Director of Author and Publishing Relations at Amazon. Prior to that, I ran legal affairs for the Knopf Publishing Group at Random House. And I'm joined today by a very august panel that I will introduce in a moment to talk about the many issues that independently published and, frankly, traditionally published authors also face in this new world of opportunity, one that really has grown over the last few years. Some would say frantically, I would say in truly a revolutionary style. It's very exciting. Of course, it's never been easy to make a living as a writer. So we're not talking about immense economic opportunities, but we are talking about, at least for many people, but we are talking about terrific storytelling opportunities and the ability to perhaps carve a career out for yourself as an author. One of the great things about the new technologies that have sort of unleashed, democratized what I like to say the means of publication is this ability to reach an audience in a way that perhaps you had never been able to before. And you see the foundational elements of that pathway for people to follow in terms of reaching an audience. The things that we're still working on, though, are some of the off and on ramps and the signage and the other sorts of infrastructure that are important for authors to have success reaching an audience. And certainly libraries reflect one example of that. It certainly has been a challenge. It still can be a challenge for authors to reach, independently published authors to reach that very important marketplace. Libraries, library readers, both in terms of finding people who will read the stories and also in terms of a promotional platform to let people know you're out there writing. And so I think this is a great first step. I'm really excited to say that we have apparently almost 300 libraries joining us nationwide, as well as many other viewers independently checking in on their own. In addition to hundreds of libraries and perhaps thousands of authors and other participants, we have hundreds of questions. And so I don't want to take too much time before we just launch right into it. But just briefly to introduce my panel today, I'm joined by Ingram Sparks' Robin Cutler, Library Journal mover and shaker Jim Blanton, award-winning indie author Elle Penelope, and filling in for Kira Parrott, who unfortunately could not join us today, is Bibliolab's own Allie McKinney, who will speak to a number of issues, in particular on the Selfie Publishing Program, which is a great pathway to get your book into that important library marketplace. You know, normally I would do this in sort of, we have questions that cover a bunch of different categories, craft questions, formatting and file questions, marketing questions, sort of industry type questions. And normally I would set these up in a chronological order. But this is a really special day, I think, in terms of working with libraries. And so I thought I would lead with those questions. Jim is our library expert, though I'm absolutely asking all of our panel members to contribute their thoughts as well. And I thought, Jim, I would start with just a broad question to me, and I think to many others, the whole idea of libraries and how they acquire books, how they decide to acquire books, is sort of a black box. And just briefly for context, I'm drawing on a couple of questions here. Caroline Carter, I'm sorry, I'm not going to use last names anymore. That was my mistake. Carolina from New York Public Library asked very simply, how do indie authors get their books into bookstores and libraries? Joe from the Chapel Hill Public Library is asking about the business model for libraries, how that works, how often you have to rebuy books, if that's the case. Anna from Austin is interested technically in knowing, you know, what kind of formats do libraries take? How do you get the book actually in there? And that reflects a number of the questions we've got along these lines. Jim, can you give us some visibility into that?
Sure, yeah, I'll do my best. Every library I've ever been at sort of uses the basic framework of looking at review journals. Like Library Journal is a great example where the selection team, there's usually a selection team that will be split up maybe by, fiction genres or subjects and nonfiction, et cetera. and they will go through these review journals, and based on the reviews, either decide to purchase or not purchase those materials. So it's really, at least, I mean, from the very beginning, I started this 17 years ago. That's sort of how things have worked, and we will have our own, book jobbers that we go through that we receive discounts through, and that's the primary means for getting materials into the library. And of course, as you mentioned, things have been changing, of course, with the independent movement and so forth. When I started, there was really a big reluctance to allow independent authors to come into the library, sell their books, or to approach us and express their interest in getting their books into the library. And that's always been something I've taken issue with since I started. I always enjoyed working with independent authors and having them come in and do programming, and we would purchase their books on the spot, actually, to add to the collection, really kind of a grassroots sort of thing. But that's been changing now since there's been this explosion. Like you said, there's the democratization of the tools and paths for entry for indie authors to get their works out there. So now I think it's changing, it's morphing. You see libraries that are working with indie publishers to get works into their collection. Biblio Board's a great example, in recent days of allowing authors to directly submit their works to our collections. So the doors are opening more than they have in the past to indie authors to get their works into the collection, because before it was really limited to kind of the mainstream publishing, through those review journals that we relied on primarily. But now it's starting to expand beyond that.
Allie, do you want to talk a little bit about that path?
Yeah, I would love to. So one thing that's just been so huge for us is finding a way to help librarians get those books from their local authors and their community into the library system in a way that's easy. If they're getting hundreds and hundreds of books coming in through their doors, which some libraries are, it's really difficult to be able to take the manpower to look through all the books and decide on quality, and if they're able to provide those for their patrons. And that's really why Selfie came to be, was to solve that issue. And when people submit their books, they go through to Library Journal, who's a very trusted review source. And so when they look at those books, they're able to say, yes, this is a good book that your library can be proud to share with the community. And that allows the libraries to be inclusive in that way, so that they can take those books, send them over, and if they get that stamp of approval, they can help promote them and share them, instead of just maybe taking them and putting them in a small collection as a small token. So that's really been fantastic to see, and it makes things like this possible. Indie Author Day is possible because libraries are realizing that there's so many more authors out there than there ever have been before that need to get promoted, and they need to start making that connection in the library, where there are these people who care so much about books and they care about the industry. And that's where you find so many readers in your community who are looking for people just like you. So it's really fantastic to see this coming around and libraries really being able to take ownership over this.
Thanks, Allie. So you spoke about Selfie, and I actually would like to open this question up to everybody here today. I'm an author. I have an independently published book. I've got a great cover, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I want to convince not just my own library, but libraries around the country that this is a book worthy of including in their collection. And I want to work with these libraries to provide them with whatever help they need to help, me find my audience. What are some of the other paths? What have folks found to be useful? Leslie, you're an author. Do you want to speak to that, perhaps?
Sure. I know that as an indie author, it can be really difficult to get into the libraries, obviously. I know that many authors have contacted individual libraries in the past. There were a couple of ways to try to get your book in. I've used Selfie personally to get my ebook into libraries, and it's been a very easy way to go. You submit your book, you upload it, and it automatically goes into your state collection, and then you get the opportunity to have it reviewed for it to go into the national collection. And since there's so many tasks that you have to keep on top of as an indie author with marketing and the writing, going to individual libraries isn't something that I've taken the time to do. So I found Selfie really useful for getting into the libraries. I really appreciated it.
And I want to speak just to one thing. When you're going to a library and getting your book in there, it's not so much correct me if I'm wrong, it occurs to me it's not really so much about getting paid for that individual copy of the book that people will be able to read. It's really an exercise in growing your audience. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. Yeah, a lot of authors are using loss leaders. They're giving away free books as a way to get visibility. So even though with this program with Selfie, you're not going to get paid for your ebook, you are expanding your audience. And you are, and there's statistics that say that people who read at libraries go on to buy other books from that author if they find someone that they like. So I definitely view it as a way of marketing, of increasing my visibility in a really crowded market.
And I think that's important to remember for the audience of authors out there. You know, you really have to identify your goal both broadly, you know, what are you hoping to achieve by writing and publishing a book, but also in these individual activities. Your goal working with libraries these days, I think, as an independent author, is not to necessarily garner a great deal of revenue directly from those libraries. The goal with this is really to expand your audience of potential buyers down the road. Robin, how does Ingram Spark work with libraries?
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you, John, and everyone on the panel. Really great to be with you here today. Some of you librarians for sure, know Ingram and the role that Ingram plays in the publishing industry. Tim mentioned the jobber, where libraries purchase books. So Ingram is a jobber in the industry, supporting both libraries and booksellers. So publishers make their content available to Ingram, and then libraries and booksellers can purchase that content from Ingram. So we're the middleman in the industry. 3 years ago, we launched a service called Ingram Spark, specifically designed for authors and independent publishers, where they can make their content available to Ingram, just like the big 5 publishers do. And then libraries and booksellers can come to Ingram and purchase that content. It's basically what's called distribution, and it's a vital piece to any author or really any publisher's success, is to be associated with a wholesaler distributor like Ingram. And basically that's what Ingram Spark does. We can make content available in a print-on-demand model, and we can talk about that more later in this discussion, and also as ebooks. And we make that really easy for independent authors and publishers to do.
Thanks, Robin. Jim, bringing it back to you to talk about this broader issue, but also maybe touch on what at your library, how you guys are specifically interacting with local authors or national authors who are independently published.
Well, just to provide a little bit of background, I've been here at Louisville Free Public Library as a director for about a year now, and I came from Owensboro, the Davis County Public Library, and I was there for a few years. And it's always been a passion of mine to connect with the local creative community. And with the explosion of indie authorship, and again, the ease of getting your work out there now, relatively ease anyways, it occurred to me that libraries could really be an engine for local authors to, again, get exposure. And so we launched this program called ePublish or Bust, and the idea was, and is, that it would be a one-stop shop for authors to go, indie authors in Kentucky, to go and learn what libraries in their community and throughout the state were doing in terms of like educational opportunities. Like we offered, for example, a year-long workshop on how to write and publish your book. And also as a resource for them to, the authors, to book appearances at the library, because that's something I've experienced over the years, authors coming in wanting to get their work into the collection, but also them to come in and connect with readers too. So the site is up, and it's kind of a really grassroots movement. And so we have 20 partner libraries, and it's still a work in progress, but an author can go on there and see what libraries are offering in terms of programming. It can even include writing workshops and local groups who meet at the library to critique works, as well as to book appearances at participating libraries. It was really meant as a way to kind of open our doors and welcome authors in a way that they haven't been before, and also just to make it easy. because one of the things I get when I talk to libraries and try to pitch this to them to join our movement is, well, you know, we get people in who are a little eccentric maybe or demanding. And so I said, well, this is great. You can go onto this one-stop shop site as an author, click on a calendar, book an appearance, and now we've added on the ability for the libraries who've subscribed to BiblioBoard to actually, you know, they can upload their works on the site to the participating libraries in Kentucky. I think there's 7 right now, including us. So that was what I was doing back in Owensboro, and that's still going, and we're still trying to develop that site and fine tune it. And the hope was and is that we would expand beyond Kentucky. So there would be this nationwide framework for authors to go to, just a one-stop website where they can go on, see all the participating libraries across the country. If you're sitting in Kentucky, you just published a book on Amazon, and you want to go have an appearance in Seattle because you're going there to visit your sister in 2 months, you can go and look at their library, see if they participate, click on a date, book your appearance, and then you're all set to go. So we really want to make it easy for authors to come into our libraries here in this state anyways, and hopefully beyond as we keep rolling. But I'll refer back quickly just to what was said before. It really is important, I think, to develop those relationships with your local librarians as authors. That's another means of getting your book in. If you're known to the librarians who are, you know, in your community, that's really great to do those sorts of personal calls. You just have to be aware that when you come in, you might receive some resistance initially, but hopefully you can with a little bit of perseverance and diplomacy get a good response.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, to me, as I listen to all of you speak about this, the parallels to the challenges independent authors face with bookstores, physical bookstores, is also, it seems quite analogous in many ways. And it's nice to hear, Jim, about programs, initiatives like yours that are trying to find scalable, efficient ways for folks to sort of breach these previously very difficult walls, unless you were coming from a traditional path. And I think you'll see, the audience, I think authors will see that a lot of these are parallel situations in the sense that you are doing what publishing houses do. In addition to writing a book, you're essentially serving as your own publisher. And it's a great opportunity, as I said earlier, but it's not necessarily for the faint of heart. It's a challenge. And the first most important thing, certainly, is writing a terrific book. But I'm choosing my words carefully when I say it's only the first most important thing. And being able to get the book into all the places where audiences might be, bookstores, libraries, online, is really the continuing challenge, but one that I am confident will continue to see great progress. So I want to take a shift, sort of and start talking about that process of creating and writing a book. We touched a little bit, and Robin, maybe you can expand on this a little bit. We have a couple of questions. Cheryl from Multnomah County Library, and Judy from Wilmar, and then a smaller question from Mary at Spanish Springs Library in Sparks, Nevada. They're all asking questions that are sort of technical. What kinds of books can you create? Obviously, an author can create an ebook that has text and images. But what about picture books? What about print on demand? What are some of the, at least technical and maybe market challenges that authors have when they start thinking about being an independent author? Well,
today, with the advent of print on demand, and Ingram is one of the world leaders in print on demand technology. And so your book isn't really limited anymore. There's all kinds of trim sizes, different aspects of color that you can include in your book. It can be a hardcover book and still be a print-on-demand book and still be cost-effective. So basically, once you have finished, and I'm glad you talked about this, John, once you've created your fantastic book, you've written it, you've had it professionally edited, hopefully you've had it professionally designed with a great cover, and I know you want to talk about that and the importance of covers. But once you've finished your book and you have it in a digital format, and for a print version, you would need PDFs, a PDF of the interior and a PDF of the cover, and that's fairly easy to do. And then an ebook, you would need an EPUB version of your book. Once you have your digital formats ready to go, you can upload them into, a platform like Ingram Spark. There's a nominal setup fee to upload a title, less than $50. Some platforms are even free. Upload your book and then make it available to Ingram's catalog and promote it, to librarians and to booksellers by saying the book is available from Ingram, and that's kind of all you need to say. And then a library or a bookseller that's interested in your book will order it from this Ingram, from this one source, which kind of solves the problem for both librarians and booksellers as well as publishers. They can go to a single place, order the book. There's no inventory on a shelf. We are actually manufacturing books when we get orders and fulfilling them, like even to Amazon. So an author today doesn't have to invest in, stacks of printed books, and that just solves a huge problem, I think, for authors. They don't have to worry about predictive ordering anymore. That books are actually printed, and you pay as you go. And so that's really, really easy to figure this out today.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. About 8 years ago, when we really started to talk about these opportunities, I used to say to folks when I was at Amazon, look, you can be an author, and I wasn't proud of this necessarily, but you can be an author for no money down. And a lot of the investment that formerly you had to make economically in terms of print runs, just that alone, the technology is developed in a way so that, particularly print on demand in a trade paperback, sort of the traditional paperback style, it's very hard to tell the difference. And most companies can turn those orders around in 24 hours, so that somebody buying your book in print form on Amazon, for example, that person oftentimes can get that book the next day, as fast as if the book had previously been printed. With ebooks, obviously, it's even faster. Speed doesn't mean, speed isn't by itself a value, particularly if you're not paying enough attention to the quality of the work. And we're going to talk about quality in terms of craft in a couple of minutes, but I think it's important for people to understand contextually sort of the different routes you can follow. And Robin, I think you did a great job of explaining that. But I also want to talk about the design and formatting in an ebook, as Judy from Wilmar asked. How important is that? Leslie, why don't you take a stab at that one to begin with? But I'd like to hear from everybody on that.
For me, just the attention to detail and quality over the whole process is important. So print formatting and ebook formatting, my goal is to make my book indistinguishable from a traditionally published book. So I do take care with the formatting. There's lots of programs. There's also people you can hire that it's relatively inexpensive to get the book formatted correctly to make sure that it works across all the devices. You don't know what people are reading on necessarily, whether it's their phone or an e-reader or the computer. So taking some time and focusing on the ebook formatting, I think, is definitely worth doing.
Robin, do you have further thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what I always recommend to authors is, you really don't know these days. The industry is changing so quickly, as we speak, really. You don't really know, how your readers prefer to read. There's still a lot, and still print is sort of the dominant way, but a lot of readers do still read in print. Some still buy hardcover books and still prefer to read that way. Certainly e-readers. So I say make your book available, in as many formats as you can afford to make that. Your book, hardcover, paperback, ebook, that's all easily now available to you. And so make sure when you're working with your designer that you are designing your book in multiple formats, and most designers, as Leslie said, can handle that very easily. And then make your book as widely available as possible. So Ingram, services some 40,000 retailers and libraries around the world. We're the largest wholesaler of books in the world. And so when you make your title available to a resource like Ingram, you have really good availability for your book. So that's really just as important, I think, as the formatting.
There's two things that came out of those answers that I want to emphasize. I think Leslie's point: you're not competing against other indie authors. You're competing against traditionally published authors. But let's actually think more seriously about this. You're competing in terms of eye share and mind share with movies, music, video games, everything you can do on those devices that we carry around with us right now. And you really have to think about creating a final product that is professional on every level. And I think Leslie is absolutely right to emphasize that. And to Robin's point about availability, you really want the books to be everywhere your reader might be. And that has been challenging in the past, and it still continues to be challenging. For example, it's not easy necessarily as an indie author to have your book translated, and it can be expensive. For many years, it was very hard, for example, to create audiobooks. And that has been made much easier through programs like ACX. And so thinking about expansively about all the different audiences you can reach, I think is really important. Allie, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, I just wanted to say too that coming from the selfie side of everything, the way that the book looks does make a huge difference. When you're seeing it and you see a professionally done cover, a file that works well and flows well and looks good, I mean, that's a big part of the initial process when we're looking at all these books, is being like, does this look like a professional book? And the more professional it looks, the further it's going to go just everywhere, Through Selfie, you can do a PDF or an EPUB, but for both of those, I would suggest making sure that you know where people are looking at books and where they're opening them and testing them, making sure that there's no problems with those ebooks. There's a lot of software out there for authors nowadays. One, through Bibliolabs, we also partner with Pressbooks, and they have this software that allows you to create your book in all these different formats. They have Mobi file formats, EPUB, and PDF, and they have a version called Pressbook Publics that libraries all over are starting to pick up and use, which allows authors to create all these files for free. There's also there's a library version, which is Pressbooks Public, and then there's also a paid version. But beyond that, there's other programs out there as well. So finding one that works for you, that you can create all these different formats, if you don't yet have the budget to be able to pay a person to design it individually, you have a lot of options. And taking the time to look into them and try them out and read reviews is important. It's a big part of the process.
Jim, any thoughts on your end?
Well, I would just echo what others have said. The more professional and polished it looks, the better off you're going to be, because that's just one more filter, for both readers and for the people who are purchasing. If you see something that looks like it was kind of homebrewed versus something that looks like it's been put out by a traditional publisher, your instinct is going to be, I'm going to gravitate towards this one. So I would just say that again, the more professional it looks and the more it looks like a normal book that you would purchase at a store, I mean, so much the better.
I agree and would emphasize everything and reinforce everything folks have just said. Remind people about the larger competitive landscape that they are a part of, but also reference your goals. And I'll just step back a little bit from the sort of commercial-minded aspect of this and say, I know many, many people here in the States and frankly around the world whose idea of writing a book and making it available isn't necessarily about building an audience. It's capturing a story that they hope their descendants will be able to share down the road. And so it's really important just to step back as you dive into this opportunity to think about, okay, what do I hope to accomplish? And that can help you decide how much to invest in creating a great package beyond just the story you think you've told. But making that investment will make a difference in terms of receptivity to your book. We've got a bunch of craft questions that I want to shift to, and there are a few that are very craft-like, and I'll get to those in a second. And Leslie, I'm going to lead these to you. because you're probably the only really creative one on the panel, at least relative to me, in terms of writing. And maybe that's not fair. Others should pipe up if I got that wrong. The first thing that I think is really tough for people to grok, to understand is this is a challenge. I mean, writing a book has never been an easy thing to do for most people, I believe. But you're not just writing a book, you're not just telling a story, you're also serving, as we said earlier, as publisher. You know, how do you create, this question came from Joe at KDL. How do you create a discipline that enables you to craft great stories and also essentially run a business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it actually is a discipline. It takes a lot of concerted effort to serve as both the author, the creative, and then take that hat off and put your business hat on and become the marketer and the publisher. And it's not an easy task. I mean, I did a lot of research before I decided to go the indie route, and I spent over a year while I was writing the book, my first book, and finishing it. I spent that same time researching all aspects of the publishing process just to know what I was getting into. And for me, it's really about time management. I was already an entrepreneur, so I had, you know, the kind of skills, I had already developed the skills about being able to manage my time and work from home and get things done. But I do work full time at the same time as I'm an author. So it's almost like having another full-time job, because I try to spend several hours a day on the books, and then the marketing aspect takes up another few hours a day. So it's really important, like you said, to focus on the goals and to change the time depending on what you're doing. So when I'm actively inside a book, 70 to 80% of my focus is on actually writing and doing that. And the marketing, you know, takes a back seat. And then there's times when you have to do a marketing push. And so that's not the same time when you're going to be actively as into the writing process. So a lot of it is that management, that sort of dance that you have to do between, you know, both aspects of it to keep your life in balance in general, which it's a challenge. It's definitely a tall order.
You know, following up a little bit on this, you mentioned going indie. What kind of factors do you think go into, I mean, first of all, it's obvious, I should say this though, it's obvious, the traditional publishing path can be very challenging to break into. And so for many folks, the independent path is not only a great starting point, but really the starting point you have to start with. But for folks who are lucky enough to be considering a traditional versus a more independent path, what kind of factors should they be considering?
I think that some of the things that impelled me to go indie when I was deciding to publish were just a DIY spirit for me personally. I had had other experiences. I was an independent filmmaker, so I was really attracted to having that control. I'm also a little bit of a control freak, I'll admit. So I wanted to have my hands in the cover, and I wanted to have my hand in everything and just be able to manage that process. Also, a little bit of impatience played in. I actually didn't do any querying before I published. A lot of authors do. They will, you know, query and then have that experience and then decide that they're going to independently publish. So there's lots of different routes. But I think that having that kind of DIY, that do-it-yourself spirit, and really being taking that bull by the horns and really wanting to get your hands into all the aspects is an important quality to have when you are serving as your own publisher, because you do have to either do it yourself or find people who you trust to handle tasks for you and hire them and things like that. Having a network and pulling all that together is important in that process.
Robin, do you have some thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah, so what we've seen in Ingram Spark is sort of a blending where some authors that have been traditionally published in the past, they may be having rights returned on some earlier work that they still want to make available to the market. And so they choose to self-publish some of the older work, and then even new work that they can't find a home for with a traditional house. And then we've seen authors that have started with Ingram Spark totally as an independent publisher that have done really well and have garnered attention from the traditional houses, and then have moved on to a traditional, publishing contract. So we, it's really kind of fantastic to see, both sides of that. I think what's fantastic, and I've been a publisher myself, and I will never discount the role that a traditional publisher adds to the value of an author's work. You know, it's hard to do that when you are doing it yourself, and especially until you really learn the business of publishing, like Leslie obviously has done. It's really hard to learn it. It is a business. It's a hard business, I would say, to learn, and a pretty high threshold, I think, to do it well. So if you can get a traditional publishing deal, I still think that's a great route to take as an author. But if you choose to go indie for whatever reason, you know, you can be hugely successful. And even, as you said, John, earlier, if you're only publishing, you know, your family's cookbook for your own family, or for, you know, your children, you know, memoir, you know, that is extremely valuable, and I think, you know, helps all of us in terms of, you know, lifting all of us to write and produce and publish.
Allie, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I'd love to. So just from working with so many different authors through this program, I've really seen how much variety there is for people. One thing that I was really struck with was I went to the Hawaii Romance Conference this past year, and it had just so many fantastic go-getter entrepreneur female authors out there that I was really inspired by it, and saw that there are so many options for people. Some people choose to go indie because that's just right for them. Like with Leslie, how she wants the control and she wants to be able to have her hands in everything. There's some people who just don't want that. They just want to focus on writing, and for them, traditional might be the better route. And then there's some people who, you know, for whatever reason, find that they want to do both, and that's perfectly fine as well. Those hybrid authors really can go far by knowing their works and knowing this particular work would be really fantastic if I traditionally publish it. But this work has a different side to it, and I think that maybe that work should be indie published. And you can do them simultaneously. You can do them at different points in your career. It's really just kind of knowing what's best for you, and a lot of times it's trying and failing and trying a different way, and you succeed that way. There are some really fantastic, really successful authors out there who tried to traditionally publish and found that it wasn't right for them, and then they went indie and found that they had a huge new viewership that they never knew about before. So just, you know, being aware that there are options now, which is amazing, and it's something that is totally new to this era.
Oh, great. Jim, any further thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say, sort of tying into what Allie just said, you know, libraries are here to provide people come through our doors with the resources they need to realize their ambitions, and that extends obviously to aspiring writers. So, you know, I've been to conferences just like Allie, where I have seen these folks who are they're entrepreneurs, you know, and they need the resources and the knowledge to get where they want to go. So we're here to do that for them. We want them to come in, learn how it's done, and then give them a venue to show what they've done. So I would just to give us a plug for libraries. If you're just starting out and you want to know whether you want to go traditional or if you want to learn how it's done independently, to come see us, and we'll try and help you any way we can.
Thanks. I think one thing that I gleaned from everybody's comments is having a sense of what your goal is, and I've said this already, is super important, because it can help determine, working backwards, which of these paths is most efficient for you. It's much easier, for example, I think, to be successful in terms of reaching a large audience as a romance or science fiction or fantasy author, a strong genre, commercial genre theme, than it is necessarily in the YA or children's markets these days. There are lots of reasons for that, and those things will change over time, I think. But as you're thinking about who your audience will be, what your ultimate goal is, that can be a useful sort of analysis to engage in. I want to get really crafty now, and these are areas that I feel completely unequipped to respond to, and I'm definitely pointing these at Leslie. Got a couple of questions, Leslie. I'm gonna give them to you, and I'm gonna let you decide how best to answer them. Margie from Schaumburg asked, what do you really want to see in a self-published book as far as that hook that makes you want to read it? I would only add to that whether it's self-published or traditionally published, I think the answer is probably pretty similar. Paul at Watertown Library asks a technical question. What is the meaning behind show, don't tell, or also known as showing versus telling when you're writing a book? And another great question from Joe at KDL is, how do you make, this could be an hour or 3 by itself, how do you make relatable characters that people will love? I'm going to let you figure out how you want to approach that locus of questions.
Yeah, I think that sometimes in the discussion of indie authors, it's all about marketing, and we don't focus on craft as much. But people are going to read the first chapter, the first page of your book, and decide whether they're going to purchase it, especially online when you get that free chapter. So focusing on the craft initially is obviously just so important. I can't underscore that enough. In terms of a hook for either indie or traditionally published, I think some of that goes into the rest of them. It's about, and it depends on genre, but I mean it can be kind of hard to wrap that up quickly. Characters, plot, studying those things, and especially if you're writing in a commercial genre. I write fantasy and paranormal romance primarily. So when I'm focusing on the hook, I'm focusing on what's going to make you interested in these characters and make you want to follow them on the journey for the rest of the book. Showing and telling is a big part of that. So the difference between showing and telling, when you tell, you say, she was cold. If you're showing her being cold, you're saying the goosebumps are on her skin and she tightens her coat and she wraps her scarf around her neck. So you can take some time and explain what being cold is, as opposed to taking a shortcut and just telling me something. Now there's times for both. There's times when it's perfectly okay to tell, because you don't want every sentence in your book to be an elaborate description of the person's temperature. But when it serves the story and when it serves the character, to expand upon something like that. And I think that kind of weaves into creating relatable characters. Your goal with a character is to make them come alive on the page and to make the reader care about them, empathize with them, ideally. Even with a villain, to make, you want 3-dimensional characters that leap off the page and grab the person and make them want to keep turning pages so that they continue with the rest of the story. I think that's what makes readers fall in love with an author and want to read everything that they write. So I have tons of craft books. And I think that even once you're published, you never can stop learning craft. I think you're always going to want to either take workshops or courses. There's lots of online classes. There's millions of books probably on craft. I never stop trying to get better. And with each thing I write, learn a little bit more, because it's a lifelong journey of just honing your craft and trying to become a master at it.
Can I ask a follow-up question? It's interesting to me. I was just at a conference, Novelists Inc. or NINC, which is also a professional, very entrepreneurial-minded group of authors. And I was struck by how often I was asked, what book should I write next? Should it be a romance? Should it be a fantasy? Should it be a paranormal fantasy romance? And I think every author is different in this regard. Are you looking to see where you think the audience might be, or are you driven by your muse and hopeful you can bring the audience to you?
There's a lot of different answers to that question. Personally, I'm driven by my muse, and I'm hoping to bring the audience. But with the indie path, it is, since you are running a business at the same time, a lot of authors are making choices to try to write to market. And so it's just goes back to the goals. There's nothing wrong with writing to market, especially if you can do so in your wheelhouse, so to speak. You're bringing your muse to the market. Focusing on that and keeping an eye on that as an indie, especially if you're trying to make it a career as a writer, is important, because there are different genres that are sell better than others. Which is not to say you can't be successful writing something else, but a lot of indie authors these days are paying very close attention to the bestsellers lists and to what's selling, and then trying to focus their muse in those directions, because of the business reasons. Yeah.
Jim, thoughts on this from a library perspective?
On the writing process for your inspiration and so forth, or?
Well, sort of deciding, the choice, and it may not be the best question to ask you. Just from an acquisition standpoint, I'm imagining that you're focused. I mean, you must focus on certain markets and certain types of books more than others, and so authors deciding not to write what's in their heart, but in their heart because they think it's going to be successful.
Yeah, that's it is an interesting question. We serve a lot of indie authors or aspiring authors who come in, want to learn how to write and publish, and you do get that, kind of concentration, like you were kind of joking about earlier. They want to write either paranormal, fantasy, or something that's really commercial. So I think that's where a lot of people start at. They see it as a means for developing a career path for themselves. But my hope would be that as they develop, that they will discover that muse and write something that's in their heart, whether that ends up being the genre they wanted to go in or not. I mean, clearly some are more commercial than others. If you're coming to learn how to publish because you want to publish poetry books, you might have a harder road than if you're trying to write something about a young wizard or something like that. But I would always say, just from a personal standpoint, I would encourage people to follow their heart, write what's in their heart. Even if it might not be the most commercial, at least that will get you started, because then if you're passionate about what you're writing, you're more likely to be successful, just based on what I've seen.
Nicely put. Robin, would you like to add some thoughts?
Yeah, I just agree with everything that Leslie and Jim just said. And I was at the NINC conference and the Hawaii Romance Conference, and those are a group of writers that definitely have developed a high acumen of business knowledge about publishing. A lot of them are engaging with their readers as they are creating the work. So sometimes it's their readers and fans, who are helping to drive the story for the next book. And that's kind of amazing to even think about that. And they are in particular, very aware of fans and, what they're looking for as far as character development and engaging, all the way through that process. But I'm like Jim. I would want, especially for the first book, for someone to be totally driven by their muse, to be driven by, where the story takes them. Most writers, and probably I would put Leslie in this category, really great writers, where they start out is not where they end up as far as the story goes. They are driven by inspiration, by muse, and, just by the creative process, and not so much thinking about, what the market's going to dictate.
Those are all great answers. And Allie, I was about to toss it to you, but I'm looking, and we actually have maybe about 10 minutes left. And we haven't even gotten to what I think is at the heart of what many people are interested in, two sets of questions, sort of marketing, how do you find that audience, and then sort of broader industry questions. So I'm going to collapse a few questions and ask each of you guys to comment on this sort of broad question of marketing. And that includes things like, Leslie, you've touched on this a bit, having a full-time job as PG asked from Anaheim Public Library. What method of marketing or outreach do you feel produces the most effective results for the amount of time and money spent, given the many hats that authors, particularly independent authors, are wearing? But adding to that also, and again, this will be a bunch of different questions, and I welcome you guys to pick and parse as you wish. What social media channels are most valuable for authors these days? That comes from Carolina, here at the New York Public Library. Is it a necessity for a new author to have a website? And more broadly, what are the best ways, Carolina also asks, for an author to build a community of readers? Again, I think all of that comes under building an audience and the different tools that you can use, and the most efficient ones that you have found to be successful. Why don't we start with Robin? You're up there. Why don't we start with you, Robin?
So one of our most successful books in Ingram Spark is actually a book of poetry. And this author actually created his poems, took pictures of them, and then posted them on Instagram. And it's been widely successful. He's been widely followed on Instagram. We also have other authors that are doing really well with Facebook. BookBub is another that especially authors from NINC were really talking about. BookBub is really important, as well as Wattpad is another social media outlet. I think that's really important. What I always tell authors as far as the beginning of their marketing, don't wait until you finish your book before you visit your local library and your local bookseller, and then try to get them to take your book. You should first and foremost be a patron of your library and a customer of your local bookstore, and they are, as Jim says, hugely part of the success of your book and the knowledge that you can learn from them. So that's my huge takeaway in terms of the plug for libraries and booksellers.
Jim, I think that's a toss to you.
Well, as I've traveled around these conferences and talked to authors to tell them about what we're doing with the ePublisher Bus program and allowing them to come in and connect with readers, one of the greatest comments I heard was actually from a very well-respected and successful author. He said, in relation to people coming into our buildings to do these appearances, who might be disappointed in turnout if it's not, a blockbuster. He said he always reminds these indie authors that it's a marathon and not a sprint. And I thought, well, that's pretty insightful, and it's so true. And what we've seen when we've, since we've opened up our doors and started allowing authors to book appearances, is really the authors who are more relentless, about going out there and really marketing themselves. They're very successful. You were mentioning a cookbook earlier, like about publishing your family cookbook. We had a gentleman who published a family cookbook, and he had 70 people show up and they went just because he was marketing himself. And I think that's really the key to it. The more you're out there promoting what you're doing, we'll help you do some live promotion in the libraries through this program that we're doing. But to the extent that you can go out and market yourself, I think it's just going to add value and get people interested in what you're doing. And I'll do a shameless plug. It's epublisherbus.com. If you want to come to Kentucky and do an appearance in one of the participating libraries, we'd welcome you to come.
Allie, have you got some thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with what was just mentioned by Jim, that taking ownership of the marketing, regardless of whether you're traditional or independently published, is important. Getting out there, word of mouth, making connections with people. In terms of social media, there's so many different ways you can go. I think that one thing is finding the ones that you really can get a community out of for your personal book is important. I would focus on those. I wouldn't spread yourself too thin right in the beginning. Depending on your goals, as we mentioned several times, a website's really important if you want to be building an audience. If you're just trying to share your work with your family, your friends, your local people, whether it be a small local history or a cookbook, that's not so important. You're welcome to make one and drive people there, but the website's really important if you're trying to get your stuff out there. That's where people go to find out about your author, what you're doing, where your appearances are, what other books are available, what you're working on. So I would definitely suggest, if you're a serious author who's trying to have widespread distribution, take the time to make your appearance professional before you even publish the book, like Robin mentioned.
Leslie, thoughts?
I think one thing to remember is that social media is social, so no one wants to be spammed with constant notices about your book all the time. So building that community, building a connection, being a real person on social media is important, and then sprinkling it in with news about your books and what you have to offer. Another really important thing to remember is that building your mailing list as an author should be the #1 thing. I think even on top of social media, is find different ways to build your mailing list. A lot of authors are giving away free short stories or free books as an inducement to sign up to the mailing list, because those people you have access to. You control their information. They're not on a third-party site that could get shut down or could decide to not to show your posts. So whatever you can do to build that up for a group of people who want to hear from you and who opt in to hearing from you is really important. And that's underscored by a lot of marketing professionals. And yeah, just building that community, being a real person, sharing information about yourself and what interests you, because I think readers like to see authors as relatable. And so, and they're interested in reading books written by people that they find interesting. So sharing yourself as well as your work is really important.
Yeah, I would add, I think everybody is spot on here. I would just reinforce the point, I think, which all of you made, is really knowing who your audience is and being smart about where that audience will be found in terms of where you most efficiently spend your time. Because having a sort of broad, very superficial presence across all of these different communities or channels is not, I think, as effective as being a deeper presence on the ones that are closest to the audience you're trying to cultivate. There are basically 4 minutes left, and really the point that I would like to get each of the panelists, 2 points I'd like to get each of the panelists to comment on. The first one is the importance, and we said this, and I just can't emphasize it enough, I think, I just want to say it again, the importance of making sure that everything else about your book is as good as the book is, and vice versa. And I used to say, I used to say that it's amazing. You can write a book and make it available to everyone, as I said, for no money down. You shouldn't. You should not have your mom copy edit your book unless you're paying her a lot of money, and she's good at it. You should not just be seeking friends and family's editorial advice. It's not that you can do it for free, it's whether you should do it for free in terms of publishing your book. And I'm just going to take this on myself. I'm not going to send this around to the panel because we're really running out of time. I just can't emphasize enough how important that investment is in your cover, in your copy, in the way you develop your marketing plan. And there are great people out there. You know, the publishing world has been terrifically disrupted over the last 15 years, and that has brought a lot of changes. Some people like them, some people don't. But one of the great ones in terms of indie authors is so much of the talent, whether it's cover designers, copy editors, developmental editors, marketers, translators, audiobook narrators, all of the folks that you could not access literally 5-6 years ago are now out there and available to you. Finding them is still a challenge, and that's something we're all still working on in the industry. But find them, you should. And a great way to do that is to look at books that you respect and like, and see who's thanked, frankly, in the acknowledgments. See who has the credits. You'll see a cover designer with a credit. You'll see an agent, if there was an agent involved, thanked. You'll see other editorial people thanked. That's a great way to sort of find folks who might be able to help you as well. All right, we're now at 2 minutes, and I had a bunch more questions to get to, but I think this is the most important one, and it's one that I did a panel at BEA in 2009, really, I think the first self-publishing panel there was. And I asked each of the authors there and each of the panelists there to give, their 30 seconds, the most important advice you can give to people who frankly want to be sitting in your shoes next year when we do this panel. How can they get there? And I'm going to start with Allie.
Yeah, for me, the biggest thing is, building from the bottom up. That's huge. And I've really seen that make a huge difference since I've been working with Selfie. I'm seeing building in your local community, finding out who else is writing and supporting one another as much as you can. And in supporting one another, reading other books, finding out what other books you like, emulating them, talking with them, learning. Being a reader as much as a writer really speaks to your writing abilities and helps you improve.
I'm going to leave you right there just because I know we're running out of time. Leslie?
For me, the best advice I got about actually writing is to write first. Do it first, the first thing in the morning or as close to first as possible. That helped me actually finish the book and get it out. So
that's great. Jim?
I would kind of echo something Ali said. It's really building from the ground up, connecting with people in your community who know what they're doing, connecting with expertise in your community. And that's what the libraries are great for, connecting people who want to write with others who do write, know how it's done.
That's great. Robin?
If you want a professional book, work with professionals like Ingram Spark, and always, always, always support your local library and bookseller.
That's a great coda to sign off with. I want to thank all of our panelists, all of the sponsors, all of our viewers and listeners, all the libraries who are participating today. I want to thank, I want to note that we got hundreds of questions, many we couldn't get to. There will be continuing content, Ali, on the indieauthorday.com site, is that correct? And many more of these questions and many more opportunities to learn about these issues are coming down the pike. And lastly, I just want to send best wishes to all the folks down in the Southeast who've been affected today. Many of the folks who put this event together, based in Charleston, and none of them are able to watch this right now, but we understand everybody is safe there and throughout much of the country, and we're glad to hear that. Thank you all again, and we look forward to meeting you each individually in the days, months, and years to come. Take care.